Thank you so much for joining me. You guys are working with serious reports coming out from Afghanistan on human rights abuses, and it's very alarming. However, the Taliban are rejecting it. So, what is it that doesn't even concern them, and they think everything is just fine?
Well, it's not really a surprise. I mean, we have been documenting abuses by the Taliban for a long time, and they generally do just deny the reports. Or they say, for example, with the extrajudicial killings and the disappearances, they say, oh, this might have been, a few random cases, but we've disciplined those who carried them out and so on, which of course is entirely untrue. What we've seen is a very systematic pattern of these kinds of killings. And of course, the human rights violations, women's rights violations, it's been a steady rollout of different kinds, from education to work to restrictions on women's movement and the rest. But they try to say, of course, oh, well, we're addressing these and girls will be back in school. And they never really answer the charges that we put forward. So I'm saying it's not a surprise, but of course it's very disturbing that we're not seeing any action to address these abuses.
So, however, the sanctions is really impacting ordinary Afghans, and it is going to Afghanistan is now facing a humanitarian catastrophe. What is your solution for that? What is your recommendation? What has to be done?
Well, as you point out, in the sanctions, the liquidity crisis, which is really a banking crisis, people can't get hold of their money, isn't hurting the Taliban leadership, is hurting ordinary Afghans. And as a number of, we've been calling for this, other NGOs have been calling for it, most recently the New York Times also endorsed this. There are very clear measures that Western governments who were so long involved in Afghanistan, so particularly the US, can take to ease up the restrictions on banking, to make banks not feel anxious that they will be slapped with sanctions if they work with Afghan businesses or the Afghan central bank, to make sure that the banking system is back functioning again and is linked in with the international banking system, so the people can get a hold of their money. It isn't a food crisis. There's food in the markets. It's a problem that people do not have money to buy things. And compounding that, of course, is so many people were thrown out of work with the government collapsing, and the Taliban adding to this by not allowing women to work. So it's a compounding crisis, but the ones who have to act immediately, I mean, the UN has also called for this now, is to ease that pressure on the banking system, restore essential cash liquidity as a very important first step to address the crisis.
Sounds great. Do you mind to sit a little back, because when we edit it's a little hard for us. Yeah. Thank you very much. Taliban spokesperson talked to VOA, and he's claiming this restriction added on women, they are not mandatory, but they are according to Sharia law. So it's really hurting a lot of women, and women are still continuing protesting, and now they use tear gas against women on the streets. So what do you see this restriction going? How badly impacting women in Afghanistan?
I think it's been devastating for women. I've heard this from former civil society activists who no longer feel they can even move outside their homes securely, who are afraid of these restrictions, what the Taliban might do. We see these very brave women, of course, protesting against these restrictions, but facing, as you say, tear gassing or beating on the streets and so on. So, this is the Taliban at their worst in many ways, and really proving that what they said during the peace talks was not really true. They are really clamping down in any ways for women to express their rights.
So the Kerry report also called on the international community to support Afghan people. So, however, the Taliban are accused for human rights abuses as well. How the international community can get along with the Taliban if somehow they are being recognized by certain countries, or they get their legitimacy or recognition?
Well, I don't think they've been recognized as a government by any other country so far. But it's very important that the international community, all the countries who, again, spent so much time and effort in trying to rebuild Afghanistan, do not now look away, that they keep a focus on Afghanistan. The Taliban need to know that the world continues to watch these things and continues to call out these abuses, so that they know. I mean, right now, many of these things are, if they're not in the headlines, people tend to forget about Afghanistan. So it's very important that people really keep it under scrutiny so that we know what is happening to the Afghan people.
When it comes to violations, also a lot of Afghans now, I think I was talking to NRC secretary that 1 million of Afghans now enter this place. And when it comes to refugee status, everything, it's still there is violence going on, it's underreported. How these human rights abuses can be counted or just addressed if the Taliban, even they don't have money to feed the people?
Well, there are two different things. I mean, we're talking about the severe human rights violations against women, against former members of the government. The Taliban don't need to do that. They don't need the international funding, to stop. These are separate issues. They can certainly stop these killings. They're saying that they don't approve of these killings, and yet we know that they're happening every day. So they need to have their words match their actions. I think what they don't want to do is take action against their own commanders. Perhaps they're a little afraid of them themselves. But in terms of the aid, they also need to be doing more. I mean, they need to show that they can actually govern. Of course, the international community needs to step up to address the banking crisis and the humanitarian crisis. But the Taliban, by throwing women out of work or making it impossible for women to deliver humanitarian assistance in some parts of the country, is actually making the situation much worse.
There was a report, also part of the human rights report, that's saying a lot of working women, they lost wages. And this is contributing to the collapse of the economy because they cannot feed their families and children. Tell me more about this, how this report is indicating that.
Well, this is absolutely true. I mean, in many cases, women were, if not the primary breadwinner, a substantial breadwinner for the family, and suddenly to lose their work, to lose that income when the family of the country is already being hit by this economic crisis, it's just making things worse. Plus, as I said, in some areas where they're delivering humanitarian assistance, food supplies and so on, or health kits, you need women to be able to go in to meet with families to find out who's in need. Often a man cannot do that. So if you don't let women carry out these humanitarian actions and work in the field, then it's going to compound the problems and the suffering for those most at need.
So just last questions, Mr. Gossman. The Taliban, it's after 5 months, they're still there. So what's the recommendation for them to respect human rights, or how they can be pressured and encouraged to respect women's rights and human rights and minority rights in Afghanistan if they're ruling?
Well, I think there needs to be continued pressure on them. They want to be seen as the legitimate, government of Afghanistan. So far, I don't think they are seen that way in the rest of the world. And in order to be seen that way, they need to abide by international human rights standards. They need to stop these abuses against the Afghan women, allow girls to go to school at all ages, women to go to university, women to work in whatever field they want to, and to end these other restrictions on women's rights, and to also end the severe abuse against people associated with the former government. That is, and the media. These are at the very least what they need to do if they want to be seen as really a credible government.
Also, they were signaling that they let girls go back to school by March, which is beginning of the new year of school year in Afghanistan. Do you believe these things? I think Zheela Mujahid spoke to AP and they're just talking about it.
They've been saying from the very beginning that girls would go back to school once the preparations were made. I don't understand. I don't think Afghan girls understand why this delay and what kind of preparations are needed when already secondary schools were segregated by gender. This seems to me like another delaying tactic. Until we actually see those changes, I'm not inclined to believe the words.